just by quick way of introduction, my name's Aaron Beattie. I'm Head of Major Projects and Regeneration at ARC Partnership, and this project came into my portfolio. I'm joined by my colleague.
Jason Birch, Senior Architectural Technologist at ARC Partnership.
Right, so just get the agenda on there. Just what we're going to run through today, we'll give a bit of a background to our specific project and the brief that came out of that. And then Jason will talk you through some of the design enhancements, and we'll both discuss some of the issues that we encountered during the process and got to where we got to. So that's what we're setting out for you this afternoon. So the background to this one, obviously, you're aware of what the SHRA program was. Now, the unusual situation that we had was we were commissioned by Nottinghamshire County Council, and the properties were administered by Mansfield District Council and Bassetlaw District Councils. So we had a tripartite client that we were seeking to satisfy, and that led to certain nuances in terms of how we were managing the different properties and collating it and dealing with two sets of tenant management and everything as well. So a couple of interesting things that we picked up on that, and then we got just through that. We ended up with 12 flats in Mansfield and 13 in Bassetlaw, which was a mix of one block of 4 flats and the remainder of those being houses, semi-detached and terraced. We employed Energy Specifics as our retrofit coordinator for the process, and we procured Waits Construction as our contract delivery partner on that, because they're PAS accredited and it was through the SCAPE framework. So that's why we ended up with the structure that we did. So I'm sure you're aware of how the funding was actually done. We were involved from the early stages of putting the bid together, which again, when we're carrying out the estimates and things and looking for approval to proceed with the contract sum with all of our stakeholder clients, that started getting a bit interesting as well. But obviously funding for the scheme, and the big target for us was the 50 kilowatt target for the energy consumption at the end, and that's what really drove where we were looking at in terms of the interventions, which I know Jason will talk you through later. As I say, we selected Waits because they were a PAS accredited contractor, but clearly part of the brief that we had was that all of the contractors and supply chain, in effect, we were going to use PAS accredited, so that drove us down quite a narrow path of supply chain on that. And obviously the sign off of the designs, that process that we went through, as I say, with our various client stakeholders as well, in addition to the PAS audit as well. So it was challenging and interesting at the same time. So hopefully you'll get a bit of a flavour of that as we move through things. So as I say, that's what we took as the background and the brief that we were trying to hit, with an absolute focus really on hitting that energy consumption, and that's where Jason worked alongside us as the lead design on this, and he can tell you about some of the enhancements that we ended up with.
Where we started was we needed the thermal modelling to be carried out, and these are some extracts here from one of our properties. And what this showed us was all the relevant data, all the assumptions that were made, and the maximum benefits that the property could gain as its starting position, if you like. We then applied 3 different ratios, if you like. So you see on the bottom right there's the 0.1 U value, the 0.07 and the 0.05. And so what we did here was, if we were to apply, assuming that the floor, which was solid and therefore we couldn't enhance, so the floor remained exactly the same, but the wall and the roof and indeed the doors and the windows could all obviously gain some thermal enhancements. And so if we were to apply that thermal enhancement, the bottom right table there shows you what we would get. And so at 0.1, which was actually the figure that we decided to run with, we'd get on this particular property, we could get down to the 57.2 kilowatt hours per meter square per year. And then again, on the others, we could get down to, if we enhance the U values to 0.07, we get to 55.4, or again, if we'd enhance further still to 0.05, to 54.1. Now, this exercise, what it also did was proved by way of justification of value for money. So as much as we could enhance our walls and the fabric, because obviously this entire scheme is a fabric first and only fabric first. We couldn't, if you like, cheat and just apply PVs to the roof and whatnot to get the EPC ratings down. This all had to be fabric first. So yeah, this is where, as I say, the thermal model really did influence absolutely everything, and that is your starting point. We chose, as you can see there, the enhancements to the 0.07 or the 0.05. The benefits weren't worth the value we'd have to achieve, or the additional thickness to material and installation impact to improve the building further. So moving on, what we did select then, so based on that thermal model, and say we had one of those sheets similar to what I've just shown you on to each of our properties, that gave us our starting materials. And so what we ended up choosing was the 0.1 U value to both the walls and the ceilings. Triple glazed windows and doors, achieving 0.8. We had a decentralized mechanical extract ventilation. So as much as but this was just the moisture rooms, the kitchens, bathrooms, and WCs where they had a separate WC. The remainder of the rooms would work on trickle vents and background ventilation, whereas because of the air tightness was going to be increased drastically, we had to introduce this DMEV or decentralized system. Enhanced loft, again, to give us that 0.1 U value. And the cavity walls, so where we did have cavity walls, that needed, we carried out various surveys, which I'll come on to in a moment, but in a nutshell, it had to be fit for purpose. We couldn't, if the existing cavity wall installation was not fit for purpose, degraded at any point, then that all had to be extracted and then a full fill to be put in. If the existing was fit for purpose, then, and it was only partial fill, then we would have to still inject to fulfill the cavity. I probably don't have to tell everyone here, but any cavity left in that, any air in that cavity zone would have acted as a chimney and effectively bypassed the material upgrades that we were applying to the external envelope. We then had to incorporate things such as roof vents and modifying the roof lines. So there'll be things like, because the existing roof vent would often be, you'd have the eaves vent. We'd be packing the eaves out to get the 350, 400 mil of insulation that we'd need to get to the 0.1 U value. So by default, we were crippling or destroying that vent path. So we'd have to create a new vent path and introduce additional roof vents, tile vents. And in some cases, the roofline works, we'd have to extend the roofline out where the existing soffit wasn't adequate to give us our additional thickness to the roof, the wall build-up, as well as the minimum of a 40 mil drip that we'd need to comply with regs. And then there's obviously the impact to the external areas, and this was a whole range of measures. So outside the building itself, because again, you're extending, or in our case, a 200 mil of phenolic insulation was what we applied to our walls, and so therefore you'd immediately impact the surrounding areas, whether that be footpaths, whether that be gates, fencing, and then all the appliances that are fixed to your walls, whether it be hanging baskets, washing lines, canopies, and all sorts. They'd all have to be removed and reinstalled. This gives you a flavour. I won't run through them all, but it gives you a flavour here of the information that we gathered ahead of going to site. And in part, some of this was needed to inform our design. So you've got all sorts, as I say, endoscopes, the cavities, obviously I just talked about some of that. Pull-out tests, not something that people immediately think of, but the existing substructure that we'd be applying our installation and render to needed to be tested to ensure that it could take the loading and the fixing requirements. Air test, that's part of the SHDF requirements, as were EPC ratings. So we needed starting certificates if they didn't exist already, we didn't have any. We'd need to get some starter certificates done, and then obviously we'd have to do the same at the end of the job, provide a current EPC certificate at the end of the project. As it stated earlier, one of the project requirements was that the properties selected were EPC C or worse, and that was on a sliding scale for as far as funding went. So if you had an EPC F or G, then you got more funding than a C or a D. But likewise, it was mandatory that we had to achieve a minimum of an EPC C upon completion. This really was, to say, truly fabric first. So the lessons learned.
Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, the issues that we had with the sort of tripartite client structure and getting sign-off on some of the key decisions was difficult in some cases. Obviously, personnel being allocated, there was a time of change, and I think it's worth reminding everybody on the call that we were actually in the COVID period when we were going through this as well. So that introduced a number of issues with people remote working and contactability and things like that. And yeah, I think everybody in the industry was challenged with new ways of working in a very short timescale. But trying to organise surveys and things like that using you know, client tenant offices and what have you, that proved yeah, challenging is a good word.
It is.
Yeah. So the process that we went through, we worked on a process of developing estimated costs based on the desktop work that had been done, and we hadn't completed all of the surveys at that point in time. Some of the surveys proved even more difficult due to residents' fears over COVID, etc., etc. So, a number of issues. We had to take a flyer on some of the costs. Say that in inverted commas because it was based on obviously knowledge that we'd gleaned. But yeah, there was an element of risk in that in getting clients to sign up. So they would sign up for us to deliver a fixed price contract, and yet we were then at risk with the supply chain in terms of some of the final issues. So yeah.
Happy. If we move on to some of the lessons learned from a design point of view, obviously the target energy consumption of 50 kilowatt hours per meter square per year was a very big challenge, and I know the practices up and down the countries on their various practices, they certainly struggled with it, and indeed we did. We probably 25% of our properties are likely to achieve the 50, with a remainder in the 50s and early 60s, which in itself was a huge success. I think, as I say, a lot of people really struggled with it, especially when you consider the ground floor area couldn't really be enhanced. And I say that obviously from my point of view, if you was to apply an installation to the ground floor, then the impact meant that the tenants would have to move out to the extent of the internal works. All your floor finishes would get replaced, all your skirting boards, or your door heights, room heights, your first riser on your first step. All of these things, your thresholds, they all get impacted, and of course that would have a huge cost and knock the cost out of being a realistic value for money and project. So, so as I say, the floors had to be remain as they were, and that just gave you a constraint that force you into other things. I did notice, as somebody's question popped up briefly about regarding planning. Planning was required, as was obviously building control. I'll cover planning briefly now. We managed to get permitted development on a number of our properties, and I did have to go for full planning on approximately half of them, which we did achieve, and we managed to obviously get that through. You'll see on the case studies later on, I can explain later which ones I could get away with, shall we say, as part of permitted development. The property selection is crucial, but regrettably, I think the problem we had is that the approach taken by, in our case, there's the various district councils, is they would just give you some of their worst properties. And there wouldn't necessarily be a run of properties. They wouldn't necessarily be, I mean, 2 semis, although we did actually have a couple of those. But I would often have 1 semi here, another semi 5 doors down, and the likes. And we progressed through that way. And that just meant that we had additional issues with. I
was just going to say as well, that introduced a couple of challenges with party wall issues as well. In a couple of locations. So, you know, in addition to that, and obviously having not being able to have a centralised site set up, because originally we were actually in the 2 districts anyway, but then in one of the districts the properties were quite scattered as well. So we couldn't take advantage of a centralised site compound and things like that. So yeah, that affected the cost and the programming. But some of that programming effect worked to our advantage when we talk about some of the other stuff, because it allowed us to be a bit more flexible in terms of sequence of deliveries.
Statutory bodies. Anyone that's obviously tried to work on these sorts of properties will know that regrettably your local water and gas and electrical boards are a law unto themselves. In our case, a lot of these could only be instructed by the property owner, so we couldn't pass this off onto the contractor to accommodate and to liaise with, and to ensure that it all came within the program that they promised. We were left, and as everyone will be, you're left to various, in our case, council members, ensuring that we had the right people turning up at the right time, and this 9 times out of 10 isn't the case. They need constantly chasing, and even when they do turn up, it's not the right gang to do the right works. So a real challenge, and it's going to be a challenge up and down the country. PAS limitations, as Aaron kindly reflected on earlier, the limitations of PAS and meant that to find PAS accredited contractors and subcontractors literally limited us to our window manufacturers. For example, they were in a pool of 1. We could only go to 1 window manufacturer that had accreditation, and so that gave us limitations insofar as all of the SHDF projects up and down the country could only go to the 1. So you might imagine, say, obviously all these pools all happening at the same time really did put a bit of an added pressure and windows of opportunity on everybody, basically. So yeah, much smaller pools of resources that you could go to. So site surveys, as we mentioned, COVID, massive problem when it struck. So even though we had tenant liaison officers assigned, both contractor tenant liaison officers and council liaison officers, access to the property was still very challenging. They were still individuals not comfortable with others coming into the properties, individuals not comfortable with noisy works. We actually had an individual who was had severe needs, and we literally could not make any noise on a Friday between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, wasn't it? Yes. So again, it just impacted our works, and these are things that weren't made knowledge to us as a design team ahead of the game. It wasn't until we were on site that some of these things came to light. And then we also had some the district councils had their own remedial works, which often overlapped our works, some of which were pre-planned works and maintenance works. Others were remedial immediate action works based on high winds or fallen trees and such, which obviously needed to be dealt with immediately, but that still impacted on our program, and it just wasn't foreseen.
I mean, from the health and safety aspect of that as well, because obviously we're taking possession of a property to work on the property, and then the landlord authority needs to come in and carry out their work. So, you know, when you've got scaffolding up and things like that, there was a number of sort of practical challenges on that as well, which was affecting how we were actually carrying out the works. But I think when we've actually got that base level survey information as well, if that would have been sufficient, fully detailed and allowed us, and I think that might be actually the next point on there.
It probably is, yeah.
So when we actually got into some of this, the information that we had, principally because we had the two separate clients, landlord authorities, we didn't have the same consistency across that information. And some of that down to the properties as well, in terms of as-built information and things like that. We also found, after we'd actually started, there was a couple of the properties that had slipped roof slates, which had allowed birds to get in, and then obviously we were affected by the Countryside and Wildlife Act, not being able to disturb wild birds during that period. There's an interesting one, which I know Jason will come on to in a bit, in terms of the actual type of construction. So we had a mix of building typologies. So it didn't allow us to just stick with one solution. We had to find, in some cases, solutions on the hoof and the mow. As I say, Jason will go into that one in a minute. But we ended up carrying out additional asbestos surveys, surveys for services, drainage in some cases as well. I mean, we were moving some of the back inlet gullies because we're putting the 200mm insulation on the outside. So there's a number of works like that, which then allowed us to find further challenges with the individual properties, shall we say.
So if we move on, this was indeed one of our challenges. The initial, on these particular properties, they were identified as a no fines property, because typically the early surveys wouldn't have gone out with any high level scaffolding and whatnot. They'd have just gone around and core drilled into the lower levels, and the lower levels, quite rightly and still do, show that it's a no fines panel. However, what we ended up with in this particular case, and this affected 5 of our properties, it's actually no fines, and you'll see there on the ground floor the cream coloured elements that have still got render on. Those are your no fines panels. I also then had, as you can see also there, a brick gable, which was a cavity brick gable. The no fines panels were solid. We then had, if you look on the top right image, we then had a blockwork infill that had been done previously on a previous project, clearly to replace more than likely a lower level infill panel. And then first floor, which was the real shocker, was that we ended up with a timber construction at first floor, totally timber, with ply facing. And what they've done is they just rendered over the entire lot and hid everything. As you can see there on the bottom right, on the right hand side, you'll see that the neighbouring property, which we hadn't, which wasn't in our scope, that just hid everything, and yeah, you'd never know. So that was certainly one of our challenges. So quality. Lessons learned on quality. So we need a very close liaison with your retrofit coordinator. So ahead of going to site and instructing everything, all of my designs had to be signed off by the PAS accreditor, and we worked back and forth to get to a level of detail and that they were happy with. The quality on site just meant an awful lot more site inspections. So under the NEC contract, I was also the supervisor, and yes, the number of additional inspections and additional certificates that we had to instruct to maintain the level of quality that PAS requires was well beyond what we envisaged at the start of the project. Homeowner packs. So the reality is, on completion, as well as having this super efficient building that will behave in a totally different way, it's, as I say, far more airtight. And so they will need to ensure that their trickle vents remain open. They will need to open their windows from time to time to allow the building to breathe. But there's also elements of the 200mm phenolic meant that they couldn't just fix a new hanging basket or a new external light or a new security cameras and whatnot to the outside of their walls. The fixing types that they would need to use would be a specific fixing type. And so there's almost this homeowner pack or handover pack that you need to kind of give them to educate them, not just the tenants, but also the actual the councils, in our case, the homeowners, the landlords. So moving on to some of the case studies. So here we have one of our properties, I say, great befores and afters. This was another one where we had, you'll see there's on the before, we had this tiled, which was back onto a timber frame, but of course this was a little bit more obvious that it was a different substructure behind, and so that could also get tested, and we could allow for that earlier in the design scheme. But then you'll also see on the left hand side there they had a bolt-on UPVC entrance porch, and our other things on some of these was this was actually two properties, and we did do both of the properties, but they were subdivided into 4 flats, and so this added an additional issue with regards to compartmentation, fire compartmentation. So we've ended up compartmentation both horizontally between flats, ground and first, as well as vertically between effectively the buildings, so that ground floor flat and first to first are equally compartmentalized. This one here, you'll see there's all manner of things here. This was one of the few that we ended up having to extend the roof on. So the gable end on the right hand side, you can't quite see it on the left. The existing gable had no projection, or at least the gable on end, it had no projection at all existing. So our 200mm phenolic that was going to wrap around had nothing to come up to the underside of. So the entire roof had to be extended. And then this also had, because the age of the property, it had various items such as you'll see on the left hand side. The existing, it had a the entrance canopy was precast concrete, extremely heavy, and we weren't going to be able to rehang that once the insulation and render had been applied. So we had to then apply a new GRP canopies. This one here, interesting. Now this one, I managed to get permitted development on this, but the reason I got permitted development was because we went for a brick effect render. So the right hand, the two images there, we did both of these properties, they're actually rendered, but with a brick effect render. But you will see if you look at the eaves line, there's virtually no soffit left at all. We've taken almost all of it. I managed to achieve the 40 millimeters I needed, and to sustain us, I mean, not having to extend the roof lines out in all of these. I just saw the question pop up. Yes, we did hack off the projecting seal details, and just above on the previous image, you can see them there. They did get no, in fact, no, we didn't hack those off. What we ended up doing was the phenolic insulation was built up in two 100 mil layers, and so for that short distance, they projected out approximately 35 millimeters. So we actually just cut away the back of the phenolic by 35 mil and sat it over the projections. And so the loss of just the 35 mil over that line wasn't enough to reduce our U value to below 0.1. So we managed to get around some of those where we could, just being practical about things.
Well, we took out the corbelling, didn't we?
We did, the corbelling did come out.
Things like that.
Yeah, but that's just a feature anyway. This one here, this was actually the individual that had a special needs. So the lean-to on the right-hand side was an extension previously, and that's got an internal hoist and all sorts in there, which when it came to the loft insulation and everything else, gave us additional issues. What I would do is, you can see here, that the theory was that we took the insulation up the walls, and obviously all the elements, the doors, the windows and everything else in that elevation were upgraded also. But then instead of following the pitch line with the roof upgrade, I took it along, I improved the loft insulation. And so what that allowed us to do was, I could, instead of extending my gable out, this gable, as you'll see here, hasn't been extended. What I did was I reduced my insulation thickness to the gable end and introduced a verge tray. Now what this allowed me to do was, my thermal line was horizontally, you see my mouse will come up. So my thermal line was horizontally across here, because I'd introduced loft insulation at that point. Okay, and so therefore I could allow my loft itself to be, if you like, it didn't have to achieve the 0.1 U values. It didn't have to achieve the same thermal capacity, because I had my thermal line in, and so I could get away with reducing my insulation thickness, and in this case, obviously save time and money on not having to extend the gable and the roof. This was one of our blocks of flats. There's 4 flats in here, but you'll see here everything's obviously been replaced virtually. We've replaced the gutters on these as well, but you'll see the deep recesses now, that the phenolic, the deep returns back. So we kept the line of the windows and doors. We kept them in the same alignment. Principally also, again, thinking back to the COVID time, if we were to pull those out, then that would impact your finishes, internal finishes and decoration, which we didn't want to really get into these occupied buildings and have to go in and start decorating them. So we kept the lines, the windows and doors in the same alignment, and returned the the insulation back to the and return the thermal line that way. So this is where it left us. Basically, we did find it very demanding. I've got to say, much more demanding than we anticipated. The 50 kilowatt hours was a big target, and I think that was proven in the Wave 1. The demonstrator obviously was fed into the Wave 1. The Wave 1 was reduced to only a 90 kilowatt hour per meter square per year, because it was recognised by BAYS that the 50 was very onerous. But I think the challenge that we as a team faced in even keeping it anywhere near the 50, that meant that it was a constant integrity battle and site supervision to keep it absolutely on the nose. And I think the final point we raise there is, I think it has been it was challenge. We've had to, if you like, help educate others on the path. There's quite a few that didn't truly understand it. There are quite a few that just saw it as a means to upgrade their properties, and it was a 50-50 match funding. So they just thought it's great, we just get these properties funded, and they didn't totally truly understand what it meant and what they were going to get and what's expected of them, and what they'd be handed back. So there's been quite a mission.
Yeah, I think as well, one of the really big learning points, and one of the reasons why it was more demanding than anticipated, was in terms of the level of information that was available to us when we started the journey, and then the reality of what we found. That there was quite a significant difference between the two. So although we'd made a number of assumptions and sort of made allowances within the programme and the costs to pick things up. So for example, I mean, on that last case study that Jason was showing you there, where we were replacing some of the windows and the infill panel below, at a point in time in the past, somebody had done some rewiring, and the electrical feed for one of the other properties ran along internally behind that infill panel, and when the operative was cutting that out with a reciprocating saw, took that electrical feed out to one of the other properties. Shouldn't have been there, you know, and there's no excuse for not actually doing your safe working protocols and things like that as well. But having said that, there wasn't an expectation that somebody would have put a false skirting in and run a cable there, because it was easier for them to do it at a point in the past. So things like that just cropped up on site for us. Again, the slip tiles and things, although you could see some of the roofs weren't in a great state of repair, you didn't necessarily expect to have all the nesting birds in them. So on top of the technical complexity and challenges that we had with the different property types, it was that level of base information and actually trying to do it on a fixed price at that point in time as well. That gave us some real challenge, and obviously the delivery program too. So
I think that's us.
Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.